Play to win your share of $1 million every week this football season at DraftKings.com. With 1 week fantasy at DraftKings, you can play when you want with a team you want. Just pick your contest, pick your team, and pick up your winnings. Hurry to DraftKings.com now. Use code FINE and play for free with your first deposit in Sunday's $1 million fantasy contest. This isn't fantasy as usual. This is DraftKings. Welcome to the big time. Enter FINE for free entry now only at DraftKings.com. That's DraftKings.com.
The Pirates and Cardinals have the best 2 records in baseball, and they go head-to-head one final time this regular season. Could this be a preview of next week's division series? Coverage begins Wednesday at 6:30 Eastern on ESPN Radio. Passion, opinion, must-hear radio. This is the Paul Finebaum Show. And now, Paul Finebaum.
We welcome you back to hour number 2 of our program. Looking forward to chatting about Alabama and Georgia coming up here in just a moment. Certainly, Seth Emerson from the Atlanta Journal will join us momentarily. Trevor Maddich and Dak Prescott joining us in the first hour. A few more headlines as we get going here in hour number 2. And Southern University launches the Devon Gales Fund. This is a really sad story about the player that was seriously injured on Saturday. Mark Richt obviously has had a great deal to say about it as well.
I'd like to start out talking just a moment about Devon Gales, the Southern University football player who had the spinal cord injury. I know that a lot of things have been tweeted out and all that kind of thing. I know on my website or my Twitter account, I tweeted out the way in which, our Bulldog Nation can help, or anybody around the country for that matter. There is a website. Claude, is there a way? Does everybody have access to that?
There's a handout down there that has that information on it.
And there's a handout for that. And I would think if they just went to the Southern University website, they could find it. If anybody watching would want to get involved, helping out. But anyway, I'm hoping we'll do everything in our power, as the Bulldog Nation to bless Devin and his family going through this time, and looking forward to seeing his progress.
Some really strong comments there by Mark Richt about the situation with Devon Gales. And we welcome Seth Emerson to the program, who covers the University of Georgia. Seth, thank you very much. And I want to start with Devon Gales because that has been such a sad story. And the University of Georgia, I mean, there's only so much you can do, but it seems like Mark Richt and everyone there has done has gone to the limit to try to help the situation a little bit.
Yeah, and Georgia fans, too. A bunch of GoFundMe sites sprung up Sunday and Monday by very well-meaning Georgia fans trying to raise money for the family. The effort has now been concentrated into this fund set up by Southern University. I think it's notable that on Sunday afternoon, the first day that they are supposed to be preparing for what could be the biggest game of the year, Mark Richt shows up at the hospital to go see a player who's not on his team, and he shows up there, and offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer and his family are already there. Marshall Morgan, who was the player that collided with Devon Gales, he went by the hospital as well. I know that Georgia's team chaplains have been through there and been active, and I hear that Ron Corson, Georgia's head athletic trainer, has been very involved. The quote, Paul, that was given to me by one Georgia official on Sunday was that we are treating this as if it was one of our own.
Well done in the case of Devon Gales. Seth, let me start with the story that seems to be breaking this afternoon in relation to wide receiver Isaiah McKenzie. What can you tell us about this story? What do we know?
Well, it seems that Isaiah and 4 of his Georgia football teammates were at a Chili's last night and got in some sort of confrontation with a woman, or just Isaiah did, I should say, and there was some sort of verbal altercation. He said something. An officer came to the scene, and for what it's worth, saw no reason, even after interviewing, I guess, the complainant and Isaiah McKenzie, and I guess the witnesses too, saw no reason to file any charges or make an arrest. So that would, on the one hand, lead you to believe that nothing is going to come of this. On the other hand, the report or the investigation, we're told, is still ongoing. I don't know if that's just kind of legalese, technically it's still open, blah, 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 or not, but that, for what it's worth, when they went to the scene last night, the officers did not see any reason to file charges. It's not like they're waiting to talk to McKenzie. Maybe they will again. I can't tell you whether or not McKenzie will face any discipline and whether it'll just be running some steps tomorrow morning or whether it could potentially be not playing in the game Saturday. I don't know at this point, but it does not, at the moment, seem like a huge deal.
Seth, let's get to the huge deal, which is the game Saturday afternoon between the hedges. Back in July, when the media converged, this was one of those games that we all believed would be a make-or-break game for the season for Georgia. Turns out that it's a make-or-break game for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Your view from Georgia on this big, big game?
I think it's still a big game for Georgia. It doesn't feel like... Now, I do think that if Alabama had beaten Ole Miss, that it would be even a bigger deal. But you got to look at it from the perspective of the Georgia program, especially in regards to Alabama. On the field, they've lost 2 very high-profile games to them the last 2 times they've played. The blackout game, infamously in 2008 here in Athens, and the 2012 game, which was, a toss-up, and Georgia just fell 5 yards short, and we know what happened at the end there. Off the field, Georgia's been compared to Alabama a lot, as in a negative sense, in the way of, why don't we do what Alabama does? Why don't we do it this way? Alabama does this, why doesn't Georgia do this? Alabama can win these national championships, why can't Georgia get there? Et cetera, et cetera. If Alabama can come in here and win again, especially a wounded Alabama, it looks like, not literally, but having lost 1 game at home already, then it'll reignite that criticism within the fan base here about whether Georgia is good enough. But if Georgia can beat Alabama, I don't think people around here are particularly going to care that Alabama already came in with 1 loss and isn't the same Alabama. I think they'll just be ecstatic that they beat them, and it'll be huge for this program. Now, it doesn't mean that, I think everyone understands, it doesn't mean they're going to win the national championship just because they beat Alabama this Saturday. There's still a lot of work to do, but if they win it, people are really around here going to feel great.
It's interesting to try to explain to people the relationship between these 2 schools because there isn't much of a rivalry. The 2 coaches are at the very top of the heap when it comes to success. The big difference, obviously, Nick Saban with 4 national titles. Let me flip it around, though, Seth. And if Alabama loses, we all know what the headlines are going to be for days. End of the Saban dynasty. But what are they going to be? And you alluded to it a moment ago. If Georgia drops this game to Alabama?
I think it'll be pretty similar to the kind of stuff you heard in 2012 when Georgia got boat raced at South Carolina in the middle of the season, if you remember that. It'll be that faction of the fan base will become louder that is anti, thinks they can't win the whole thing with him. It'll be tough around here. Now, some of it could also come down to how it goes. If it's a blowout for Alabama somehow, then it'll be even worse. A closer game would mitigate that. But, the point that has to be made is that even if they don't beat Alabama, they come up, if they win the next 2 against Tennessee and Missouri, they're still in great shape to win the division and get back to the SEC championship game. So there would be that kind of thing. In fact, if you went to the Georgia staff and said you can only win one of the next 2 games, that's the deal we're making with you. You can only win one of the 2. Their head might say go beat Tennessee because that's a division game. But emotionally, for a lot of people, I think they'd much rather have the Alabama game because they still see Alabama as the standard and Tennessee as just kind of a pretender. So if you lose to the pretender, you can kind of say, all right, it was on the road. Tennessee letdown week, but if you beat the team that is the standard, it shows how good you can be.
Seth, the rumor is the Tennessee coaching staff made a deal with the Devil on the same issue. They let the Oklahoma game get away as long as they would give them the Florida game, but someone didn't get the message.
Right. And this is a tough 3-game stretch for Georgia, potentially, and a very important one, which is why I think Rick is trying his best to not necessarily downplay, they are downplaying. A few times players will let it seep through that this is Bama week, this is a big game, but they're doing their best not to put all their emotional eggs in this week, because if they do that, they might not have anything left for Tennessee and then Missouri. After that, they get the bye week. I think if they can get through the next 3 weeks, they can kind of exhale.
I'm curious because I've tried to explain this, and sometimes I find myself talking in circles, which isn't that unusual, but by Alabama losing, what do you think it has meant or impacted this game the most? I'm not meaning that as a trick question, but it does seem like this game has changed somewhat.
Yeah, I think losing at home is the big deal there. It shows them to be much more vulnerable than before. But when I analyze this game, I still see Alabama having just a really good front seven on defense. I see Alabama being kind of shaky at quarterback, also not as good an offensive line as they've had in past years, not as dominant, inexperienced at receiver, and shaky in pass defense, as you saw by the Ole Miss game. However, Alabama's front seven is so good that it could mitigate and cancel out what Georgia does best, which is run the ball and protect Grayson Lambert so he has the time to find his receivers. So in one way, it's still the same old Alabama in terms of what Georgia needs to do and what Georgia needs to overcome, despite the fact they do have that one loss on their resume.
Finally, Mark Richt and Nick Saban. I mean, they are both so successful. One seems like he already has a statue. Mark Richt, in spite of all the success, there are these very quiet, lingering doubts. Try to explain that to those who may be passing through and don't know the backstory.
Well, they're not very alike, honestly, as coaches and as people. I think Mark Richt has moved a little bit more towards Saban's approach in terms of control and maybe a little bit more micromanaging. Some of that may be with seeing Nick Saban and Urban Meyer, coaches who are of that ilk, win, and Jimbo Fisher win national championships and wanting to go that direction. Some of it may be by importing so much of Saban's former coaches, like Jeremy Pruitt, the defensive coordinator. 2 other Georgia assistants are former Alabama staffers. Strength coach here now is the guy who was Scott Cochran's assistant at Alabama. But the question is, did Mark Richt need that to get to the final step? I think when you analyze Mark Richt and his resume here, he does have everything except the championship. He does not have an SEC championship since 2005, but he has 2 of those, 2002 and 2005. Winning percentage, his winning percentage is the best in Georgia history for someone who has like a certain amount of seasons. It's better than Vince Dooley's and Wally Butts. His next win, he will be alone as the second winningest coach in Georgia history. The only thing he doesn't have is a championship. I asked Vince Dooley about it, and Dooley said, yeah, they're going to name something after him, or they're going to build a statue of Richt and put it somewhere. But I think the question is how big a statue it's going to be at this point. Right now it's not going to be as big as Vince Dooley's. It may just be a small bust somewhere in the corner if you stop now. But, he's only 55. He's still got some years in.
So good to talk to you. Seth Emerson from the Atlanta Constitution giving us his insight on this weekend's game. Seth, always great to visit. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, Paul. Thanks.
Really interesting stuff. It's a really unusual game. 2 teams that don't play each other, but when they do play, memories are made, and lately the memories have not been good for the Georgia Bulldogs. We'll finally get back to your calls at 855-242-7285. Dak Prescott opened the show. What an incredible conversation that was with Mississippi State senior quarterback. We talked to Trevor Maddich. Many more guests to come, including a guest from the Wall Street Journal on, is it your imagination, or do college football games really last longer than they're supposed to, and why? Chris Felica a little bit later on as well. We'll be right back.
Individuals and
welcome you back to the program. I mentioned the arrogance of some Alabama fans. We haven't heard that. I mean, we've heard the Georgia smack. Well, you're always going to hear that from fans. I mean, that's something that you just get used to when you deal and you swim in the waters of college football. Let's go to Ed in Connecticut. Ed, what's going on, my friend?
My goodness, how are you, sir?
Doing great.
I complained to your fan, didn't really complain, but last time I spoke to you, you called me Uncle Ed, because I was supposed to straighten out all your problems with your ranting callers. I haven't been able to get through since. I mean, I have called you hour after hour straight, and I've gotten everything from you're not answering, dial the wrong, you're telling me, you can't, well, whatever. But I mean, I was beginning to think maybe I'm just up here and just lost.
No,
anyway.
Again, I want to say this. We only have X number of lines, and I hear from people everywhere we go. I can't get in. I mean, I do apologize for that. We try to get the calls as quickly as possible, but
I know that.
We're just a startup company. We can't afford a bigger phone system.
Well, there you go. Well, if you need any help, let me know.
Please.
I will start off with, today was Yogi's funeral. And I was trying to call yesterday because I didn't know if your callers really knew or whatever that anybody who had the Yes Network could have watched Yogi's funeral this morning. But, never got through on that one. Also, last week, the one thing I wanted to talk to you about is the big joke you and I had a few weeks ago when I was wondering whether Missouri could survive the UConn game. And we both laughed at that one. We both laughed on that one. Also, to answer one question you had today about last time Georgia won a big game, I think they won a huge game last year, going to Missouri on the road after Gurley.
That's a good point. One other game I thought, Ed, and I was there that day, and I don't know why I didn't remember, but 2 years ago, Georgia beat LSU. It was, remember, the Mettenberger-Murray matchup. Game day was there, and it was an epic game, and Georgia came through.
There's a few in there.
Yeah. This would be bigger, though.
I have one fear about this one and one dream, okay? My only real fear about this weekend is watching the end of the game last week when I saw Morgan miss that field goal. And everybody said, what are you worried about? It scores 48-6. I said, I'm worried because he's in there to get confidence.
Yeah, that's a good point.
He's missed a few this year. And I'm worrying when it comes down to it that could happen. But my dream, and think about this, now, is the SEC championship game. Okay? Undefeated LSU against undefeated Georgia with Fournette and Chubb.
Yeah, sounds great.
Can you picture anything?
I would love it to happen, Ed.
Yeah, well,
but I'm also betting heavily it doesn't. But
oh no, it's not going to happen. But I mean,
see, I already know who's going to win the Alabama-Georgia game. I just can't tell you.
I know that. I can tell. Like I say, all I'm hoping, realistically, I'm watching Georgia, and I'm saying, man, we have enough to beat anybody if we play our game.
You bet.
And that's all I can say. If we play our game. And Alabama is certainly no chump.
No, they're not.
But and who else but Georgia can win 48-6 and drop in the polls?
Ed, you're going to appreciate this next call. I want to ask you, when was the last time you used a payphone?
The last time I used a payphone, my God, somebody's calling from a payphone.
We have a guy calling us. And by the way, when I say payphone, I'm not talking about a Maroon 5. I'm not talking about a Maroon 5 song. I'm talking about a real
exactly what you're talking about.
payphone here. Hey, Ed, we're going to go to this guy on a payphone. Heath, you're actually on a payphone. Is that correct?
Yes.
And where is this payphone located?
In middle of nowhere, Slapout, Alabama.
Slapout, Alabama has a payphone. I knew it.
You know, Paul, this is the thing, man. Like, I'm not taking sides really for either Auburn or Alabama. You know, I've been watching football for a lot of years. And just as you have, I mean, would you agree or disagree that your experience has gotten you to a place in the pinnacle of your career where you've made it through radio, you're on TV now, you work for the SEC network? I mean, has your experience done you well?
Well, I'll tell you what experience does. It gives you the ability to make judgments that perhaps you couldn't have made without the experience. And it also teaches you not to buy in always on the hype and the trend of the moment. You're able to rely. It's like an athlete or an entertainer or someone else. You rely on the past where you don't have to obsess over it. You just make a natural reaction. And I do that sometimes with hype on certain teams. Teams I just don't necessarily buy into because I've seen the movie before. And I don't mean to pile on Auburn. I've covered Alabama and Auburn for a long time. I've seen the movie where Auburn is hyped and supposed to do this, and you know what? They never do when they're hyped to do it.
I hear you, Paul. I just the thing is, man, like this year, you know, Jeremy Johnson comes to media days and this and that, and you know, Alabama this, and they lose to Ole Miss, and Auburn obviously they're not playing well, but these guys are 18 and 22-year-old kids.
Well, no, you're right about that. But that's where you
guys made their living. Hey, let's flip the script, Paul. Let's flip it. Let's talk about you for a minute, man.
Okay.
Have you seriously? Like, I have been in the group with you and Atlanta Sam and Taylor. Sometimes it makes me mad, man. That I've seen you jogging from two. If you lined up with a set of pads on, your wife would whip you, man.
Okay, well, Heath, let me ask you. She probably would, but what does that have to do with anything?
It has to do with you guys up there bashing these 18 and 22-year-old kids.
Well, no. First of all, hey, Heath, we're not sitting here bashing.
Yes, y'all do. Everything is done. You make your living off of it. Which is cool. It's a free country. I understand that. All I'm saying is give these guys a break. Over and out. 10-4.
A quarter obviously doesn't get you what it used to. We'll take a short break. 855-242-7285. Coming back with much, much more. Phone calls at 855-242-7285. We'll also talk about the length of college football games, and they are long. And the reason we're talking about this, in addition to the fact that they're so irritating, is that my good friend Ben Cohn today in the Wall Street Journal had a piece on the length of games. It has become an issue in recent days. That's the story. The rise of the 4-hour college football game. Wall Street Journal. That's where I usually go for my college football news. And the person I usually go to is Ben Cohn. And he is nice enough to join us. Ben, so nice to visit with you again. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm good, Paul. How are you?
I'm glad. I was reading your article today, and I started thinking, I'm not imagining this. And it's not only because the Alabama-Ole Miss game didn't end until, 1:26 Eastern time?
Yeah, you're not imagining it. We actually thought that we maybe were imagining it too, so we looked at some of the numbers, and, as you know, college football and the NCAA tried to shorten games and experimented with some rule changes in the middle of the last decade. But since that season, which I think they went into effect in the 2008 season, the average game time has ticked up from 3 hours, 11 minutes to 3:20 this season, 3:22 last season. But it's not just the average that is really what makes games seem like a drag. It's the fact that there's so many 3-hour, 30-minute games and even 4-hour games, which, used to be really rare, and, in the NFL, they still are really rare. But, this season alone, there have already been 6 4-hour games in regulation, not even overtime games, and we're on pace for 18, which would be, by far the most of the last few seasons. 18 4-hour games. In 2009, there were only 3 the entire season, and I think in the last decade of the NFL, there have only been 4 combined, and college football has already passed that this season. So, the average is getting longer, but the longest are getting even longer, too.
How, Ben, does it compare to the NFL, which seems to be pretty well managed according to time? Again, the rules are slightly different.
So the NFL, for the last few years, and honestly for the last 2 decades, has kind of held steady between 302 and 307. And the longest games aren't long. So last year in the NFL, a total of 8 games went above 3 hours and 30 minutes. That's 8 games. This year we're on pace for 201 in college football that go over 3:30. Last year none in the NFL went over 4 hours, and I think we were past that in week 1 of this year's college football season. So they're shorter, and even the outliers aren't really as long in the NFL.
Let me ask you, considering my paycheck says ESPN, let me ask you the stupidest question of the day. Why are these games so long, Ben?
I think that your employer might have something to do with it, possibly. But that's a question I've gotten a lot today, and I think people are thinking a lot about. Obviously, the TV pressures and the amount of commercials and halftime. But, in some ways, it's like the football that we all enjoy watching so much now in college, like the up-tempo, run-and-gun, no-huddle stuff. That might be contributing it, too. Oregon and, faster teams around the country might be playing faster, but, when there are so many first downs and when there are so many touchdowns, there are more game stoppages, and that just sort of leads to games that last on and on and on. And so it's a little bit different, obviously. The first down rules, of course, are different in college football and the NFL. Halftime is a little bit longer in college, and then there's a TV thing. But, so I think it's a combination of TV. I think it's a combination with, the gameplay and in some ways what we enjoy watching so much about college football is what is conspiring to give us more and more college football, it seems like, at least in terms of the length of the games on TV.
And I know it's been addressed. I've spoken to commissioners about this, television executives about this. But what I find so interesting, we just looked at a chart a minute ago, and it seems like it's 2008, 2009 when it really started getting dramatically worse, when you went from 75 games going 3.5 hours to more than 200. Is that the pace of play, or is that just the pace of commercials being stuffed in there because of the rights fees?
I don't really know, but it is funny when, you look at 2008 and 2009. That followed 2007. The 2007 was the season when they made those changes with the clocks, where it started after the punts and the kicks, if you remember that. And that season, the average game time in 2007 was 3:21. There were 237 games that were longer than 3.5 hours, and 14 that were longer than 4 hours, according to Stats LLC. So it has been this bad in the past. It's just that there have been changes since then that's kind of ticking back up to those levels. So, what we're seeing now isn't quite unprecedented, but the last time this happened, the NCAA and the power brokers in college sports really made an effort to cut the game time down. So I don't know if that's something we'll see in the future, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on.
Ben Cohn from the Wall Street Journal. Let me talk to you a little bit about the overall college football landscape. You watch it from, of course, Manhattan, the ideal place to keep up with college football. Your thoughts on a lot of headline writers who have already written them, and they'll run them again Saturday night if Alabama falls to Georgia, the Saban dynasty. Where is it?
Well, that's all anyone is talking about on the streets of Manhattan right now. Where
by the way, didn't the Pope address that?
Well, that's what in Madison Square Garden. You had 20,000 people. They wanted to know what was going to happen if Alabama loses to Georgia. I think his words were fairly comforting. I was a little bit farther downtown, but I don't know. I mean, I think that obviously Alabama is the big story in college football over the last 5-10 years. I mean, the dynasty that Saban has built, and if they lose to Georgia, which I think would essentially eliminate them from playoff contention. We've seen them lose once before, but in this era, it would certainly seem difficult for them to win the SEC West and the SEC with 2 losses. And, a Nick Saban team that's been out of contention by the first weekend of October. I mean, have we seen that since 2007?
Well, when 2007 was the transitional year,
right?
No, we haven't. Not since the beginning of the 2008 season. He had not lost a second game until only one time in 2010, losing early in November to LSU. That was the second loss of the season.
So I don't think that, certainly I don't think that Alabama is irrelevant if they lose, because every team that wants to win the SEC West, of course, is going to have to go through that team to get there, and then to, get to the SEC championship and possibly, of course, the playoff. But for Alabama to not be that team if they lose, I think would certainly be a hell of a story, and, in many ways, I think probably would mark the end of this dynasty. I know there's been a lot of questions about when the dynasty has changed and whether the veneer of the team has is gone. But this was a team that in 2 years ago, of course, was a kick 6 away from probably playing for the national championship, and last year was the number 1 seed in the playoff. I mean, even though they had lost the game, they were still, almost unquestionably the top team in the country, and this would certainly be a sea change from that. So, I think that is a major story, but of course Georgia still has to go out and beat them. I think that's a lot easier to do when you're talking about it on a Tuesday instead of actually going out onto the field and doing it on a Saturday.
Ben Cohn from the Wall Street Journal, his article today, Why College Football Games Never End. It's quite an interesting read. Ben, always great to catch up. I hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Great stuff from Ben Cohn of the Wall Street Journal, and we'll take a short break. 855-242-7285. Remember, Steve Spurrier, he's still coaching at South Carolina. Big win over UCF last weekend. We'll hear from him when we come back. Welcome you back to the program. Before we get to some phone calls, let's listen to the head ball coach.
Once a year, we play the Missouri Tigers, Battle of Columbia, nice little trophy. We've been fortunate to win it a couple times, not win it last year. But I think it's sort of neat. You have a game like this. I think a lot of Big Ten teams have a game where they have a little trophy at the end. Winning team gets to carry it off and so forth. I don't think you need to have one every game, but 1 or 2 a year like that, I think makes it a little special for the players. They get a kick out of it when they are fortunate enough to win this game. Missouri is a good team as always. They've won the Eastern Division the last 2 years. They lose one game somewhere along the line, then they win the rest of them. So whether or not they can do that this year, time will tell. Their defense, I think, is the best in the conference right now as far as giving up points and yards. Their offense has struggled a little bit like ours has struggled at times. But who knows what will happen this Saturday at noon, 11 o'clock their time out there, 12 o'clock here. But we're looking forward to it. Lorenzo Nunez is ready to play. And we all know he's going to be the quarterback, until something happens, something unforeseen, if he gets hurt or so. Hopefully not. But at least we got some direction. We got some hope.
Do you know? I assume his nickname comes from Little Boozy. Do you know who Little Boozy is?
The rapper you're talking about?
Lorenzo Nunez said there was a 0% chance you would know.
Huh?
I was just curious if you knew who he was. I had to look him up on Wikipedia. Is that in your playlist, or you just happen to know who?
What's that?
Little Boozy.
No, I heard him talking about it the other day. No, I don't keep up with a lot of rappers, that's for sure.
Spurrier does not keep up with rappers, but he is very close friends with Kenny Chesney and Darius Rucker. So, I mean, what kind of question was that? Putting the head ball coach on the spot about some rappers. I don't keep up with them. Let's go back to the calls. And Uncle Lou in Augusta, Georgia is up next.
Oh, what's going on, buddy?
How are you?
Oh, Carolina and Mizzou, that ought to be a real barn burner. I guess I'll take Mizzou 6-2.
That's about right. I think it'll be 6-4.
6-4. It could be. Their defense is okay. And who would have ever thought that the person that called in on a payphone would be an Auburn fan from Alabama? That blows my mind. I guess he probably rode down.
By the way, the only place I think they still do have payphones are jails.
Oh, that could be a possibility too. But all off season, Paul, about this Georgia-Alabama game. Thinking about the game, and I assumed it was going to be a close game. I think most people did. But Grayson Lambert, now 33 out of 35, and I get it that it's not top-notch competition.
Really?
But yeah, to say the least, I'll admit that. But Alabama's quarterbacks can't do that in pregame warm-ups. 33 out of 35. If he plays half that good, this game could get ugly quick. You don't agree?
I disagree with you on that, and I think everyone acknowledges Alabama's quarterbacks are questionable, but I'm still not sure Grayson Lambert dealing with Alabama's defensive front. I know people have criticized them, but I'm not one of them. I think that's a real issue for him.
Yeah, if they can get some pressure. He really hadn't, he's been under really no pressure at all, so we'll see what happens.
That's based on the opposition, but to me, that's really a key part of this game. And what does Georgia's defense look like? We haven't seen them against a decent team yet either.
That's true. That's very true. Now, what chances do you give Nick Chubb of continuing this 100-yard game streak? Regardless of the outcome of the game.
I think Nick Chubb's one of the best running backs in the country, so I give him a really good chance of that.
Yeah, I think he'll get his 100. I really think the Dogs are going to win this one, Paul. I thought it was going to be close. Alabama hadn't been able to stop the pass for 2 years. It's not a secret. Everybody knows. We'll run the ball. We'll throw some on first down. I could really see the Dogs winning this one by 14 to 17 points.
Okay. That's what you hear so much about Alabama and Ole Miss. Well, Alabama had a chance at the end, but Alabama was also down by 19 at home. So pick your poison when it comes to where you are in Alabama. Let's move along. And a lot of people writing Alabama off. Our last caller, Uncle Lou, just said 14 to 17 point victory by Georgia over Alabama. What do you say, Jerome?
I think he'll lost his left, right, and middle mind, Finebaum. You hear me? Georgia is just like anybody else, Finebaum. Georgia's just like Ole Miss. Ole Miss beats. I got to just scratch Ole Miss right now. They just like Arkansas. They just like Oklahoma. They just like Auburn. You know what? In the media, Finebaum, who gonna write us off? Huh? Who gonna write us off, Finebaum? The same ones that told us Arizona State, Stanford, Georgia Tech, Auburn, all these teams are gonna win a national championship. Finebaum, if they gonna be the ones that write us out, gee whiz, we're gonna be all right, Paul. We're going to be fine. And then you know what? They want to talk about the SEC down. SEC been down for the last 4 or 5 years. We've been down, but guess what? Since the Tide is having a little bit of problem now, y'all can really see the kinks in the umber. Now the SEC really down. But you know what? We done carried y'all clowns for the last 5 or 6 years. We done won championships, drug us, told us to the doggone trophy, everything in the blue moon, and we can't get nobody else to help us. But that's all right. We're going to start a new dynasty then. Since y'all want to tell us this one over with, we're going to start a new one on Saturday afternoon at 2:30. Tub Rock won't rock Saturday, Finebaum. That show has been canceled to next weekend. Roll Tide and have a good damn day.
For Jerome's sake, I hope Alabama plays well. I'd hate to hear Jerome after a beatdown, as some of our callers have predicted. Anyway, it's been a good first 2 hours. Glad you're on board. Dak Prescott started it off. What a great conversation with Mississippi State's senior quarterback as the Bulldogs head to Kyle Field. That's Saturday night on the SEC Network. We've talked about a number of other things, including Trevor Maddich and a Georgia update. 2 more hours to go.
Hi, Football's back, and it already feels like the playoffs thanks to 1 Week Fantasy at DraftKings.com. With millions of dollars in prizes being paid out each week, every play in every game could take you closer to a life-changing payday. Hurry to DraftKings.com now. Use promo code FINE and play for free with your first deposit in this Sunday's $1 million fantasy contest. This isn't fantasy as usual. This is DraftKings. Welcome to the big time. Enter FINE for free entry now only at DraftKings.com. That's DraftKings.com.
Major League Baseball on ESPN Radio. It's the final week of the regular season, and the teams with the 2 best records in baseball go head-to-head.
Looking, it's gone! Matt Carpenter showing off the juice.
When the Cardinals face the Pirates, could this be a preview of the National League Division Series next week?
It's gone! Andrew McCutchen!
The Cardinals and Pirates. Coverage begins Wednesday at 6:30 Eastern on ESPN and on ESPN Radio.
Last week, Julie Carroll posted a status that read, "Just had the most delicious banana ever." It got 2 likes and 4 comments. Well, Julie, Geico also wants to make a comment. What if we told you in as little as 15 minutes you could save hundreds of dollars on your car insurance by switching to Geico? With those hundreds of dollars, we bet you can find another banana equally, if not more delicious than the one you had last week. Hashtag go bananas. Hashtag savings.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
The Pirates and Cardinals have the best 2 records in baseball, and they go head-to-head one final time this regular season. Could this be a preview of next week's division series? Coverage begins Wednesday at 6:30 Eastern on ESPN Radio.